this is the 11th hour. The president has his back against the wall. Our country is in probably one of the more darker moments. We've reached kind of this apex point in our nation's history, where we get to decide, as Donald Trump said, whether we're going to be a people that are going to be culturally homogenous and are going to be a Christian nation, whether we're going to go down the path of white genocide, our cultural genocide, and the erasure of our history and our people. And we've already begun seeing signs that this might occur. I saw recently in an article something along the lines that LGBT groups were petitioning and propositioning Joe Biden to remove accreditation from Christian schools, particularly, of course, Catholic schools and traditional Christian schools that teach about traditional morality, which is very concerning, and it should be concerning to all of us, because, of course, in the Catechism, and I explain this in my lecture, you can call it, on marriage. I talked about the right of the family to train their children. This is a God-given right to raise and to teach their children, to instruct them, because children are very impressionable, vulnerable, and the public school system, of course, at this time in history is going to teach them a curriculum that is not going to be one that's based on Christian principles, and oftentimes is going to infuse in them certain concepts of gender, whatever the new thing is, the 50 different genders and whatnot, and such nonsense. So it is very important that the family retains the right to have the option to train, to instruct their children. And of course, through Christian schools is kind of a way that the church is able to facilitate that, more generally speaking. And so the idea that the accreditation, of course, accreditation, I think most people understand what that means. That's basically the legitimacy of the education that they're receiving, and whether or not it's going to be able to, they're going to take it seriously, colleges if it's a high school, or perhaps potential jobs if it's a college, if it's a Christian college. And so, yeah, this is a very serious issue, and it was very worrying to me when I saw that, and it just reminded me of the stakes of this election, and I genuinely think that we're going to see more and more things like that. And so we have to keep praying, we have to keep holding the line, and we have to keep going to these rallies, because I do genuinely believe that these can make a difference. I think that when people are able to see that there is a real movement, a real initiative to support the president, it will show politicians that the constituency that they're supposed to represent believes this, and that even if they themselves, they're just vessels to the establishment, they still have to get reelected in November. They still are up for election, and so hopefully they'll take this as a sign that it'll help their chances to get elected if they support the president, Donald Trump. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So definitely keep praying, and definitely show up to these events if you can. So let's see. I wanted to just talk briefly about the mission, I guess you could say, the purpose of the pilgrims leaving Holland. They left Holland, interestingly enough. A lot of people don't know this, or maybe they do. I don't know. But the pilgrims first were, of course, they're Puritans. They were the separatists. They're Calvinists. And they left England to go to Holland, to go to Amsterdam to seek religious liberty. Unfortunately, they left Holland in order to go to not unfortunately, I'm glad they did, but and I'll get into this, but they left Holland, they went back to England to get some supplies, and then they went over to the New World. And the reason why I said I'm glad because of this is because my ancestors, on the Anglo side of my family line, my lineage, according to family tradition, according to my family members, what they've told me, and it's what's been passed down, I probably should do like an Ancestry.com search to confirm this, but I kind of don't want to confirm this because I just hope it's true. But from what I've heard, that my lineage traces itself back to the Mayflower, and in particular to one of the clergymen or elders, or perhaps even the pastor aboard the Mayflower. I forget which one they said it was. But it was someone of high importance that related to like a spiritual leader. And this kind of makes sense because my grandfather was a Protestant pastor. My parents are teachers, and they're both everyone in my family is very devoutly Protestant, very sincerely Protestant. They have kind of this Puritan mindset. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk tonight about, is the spiritual foundation of the United States of America and why they left Amsterdam, interestingly enough. And of course, one of the reasons why is because they were looking to go to missionary outreaches. One of the thing that young people, in particularly, they had kind of this Faustian spirit, you could say. They were, of course, all the Puritans were dissidents. That was kind of in their blood, is to be dissident, to go against the King of England, of course, the Church of England, the Anglican Church, which is very restrictive and put a tax on anyone who was worshiping outside of the Church of England, who wanted to worship in their own way and fashion. Of course, the separatists had their own way of doing things, and so they started an underground church. But of course, they experienced persecution, and so they fled to, like I said, Amsterdam. And so in Amsterdam, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities to grow and to really thrive, particularly because, it's Amsterdam. Most people don't speak the language or the same culture. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, flesh that idea out. And so one of the things that they wanted to, I guess, engender is this missionary spirit. And so that's part of the reason why they decided to go to the New World, is to give to their followers this sense of trying to blaze a new path, to try to forge a new future for themselves in order to convert the native people over there. They had heard stories, of course, from Jamestown, which had already been an established colony. And so they wanted to go around that area. Unfortunately, a storm they encountered, and so they ended up landing in Cape Cod, where they signed, of course, the Mayflower Compact, or was it, yeah, Compact, which was the first, I guess you could say, written constitution. And we really see that kind of being the inspiration to later our own constitution. And it shows the precedent that our people have always been people of faith and people of law and order, and like the system of hierarchy. And it was only the men who I believe were able to vote on that particular charter. And so one of the quotes here I have, and it is from Bradford. He was the first governor of the William Bradford. He was the first governor of the Plymouth Plantation. He said, "A great hope and inward zeal they had of laying some good foundation, or at least to make some way thereunto, for the propagating and advancing the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world. Yea, though they should but even as stepping stones unto others for the performing of so great a work." And so we saw even from the beginning, the foundation of our nation, there was this spiritual reckoning. And I think that's very important. I think we see that throughout various nations in history. We see that in India with Hinduism, Japan, Shintoism, is that from the spiritual foundation, the perennial tradition, outpours these other culturally significant aspects. America is known for its Faustian spirit. It's known for the fact that it wants to go to the moon. It's known for the Monroe Doctrine, the divine right to try to settle the West, to tame the West. And of course, we know that half the pilgrims died when they landed in Cape Cod in, I believe it was November 9th, 1620. At the winter that soon approached, half the pilgrims died, and yet they forged on. Before that, the mast aboard the Mayflower broke in a storm, and they were able to repair it. And they had the option to turn back to England, and they chose to go on. And I think the spirit of perseverance, and again, like I mentioned, the spirit of like blazing a new path, it's still ingrained in the cultural identity of America. And that is something, of course, that we as American nationalists, American conservatives want to protect, and protect that American identity. And that American identity is ethnic. This is not just an accident that it was these people from England who had this conception. And these people in the Mayflower understood this. And so when someone accuses you of being a Nazi or far-right extremist, perhaps remind them that we have the same ideology as the people who were on the Mayflower. And forgive me to the people who are talking in chat. I'll get to any questions or concerns we have. Just let me get through this here. This is something that Edward Winslow, he wrote this in one of his books. And he was responding to another reason why the English wanted to leave Holland. And it was basically because they wanted to protect their English identity, their English language, and their English culture. And so he says something to this extent. I kind of, if you read his like actual book, which I was trying to read through beforehand to get the exact quotes, and it's kind of difficult. So I pulled out like some parts, and basically says, "quote How like we were to lose our language and our name of English," and that he's basically in there. He's talking about the context, and I didn't want to go through the context. He's like, this is like run-on paragraphs. I think you kind of understand how people in these archaic times wrote. But in any case, he's basically saying that he didn't want to stay in Holland because he was worried about losing the language and the name of being English. They saw themselves as Englishmen, as someone with this distinct English Anglo heritage. And he says, keep their names and nation. And this is like the reason why they wanted to go to the New World, is because they wanted to keep their names, and this is his quote here, keep their name and nation, and not only be a means to enlarge the domination of our state, but the Church of Christ. So again, we see this idea, this foundation, this church, this religion that they wanted to establish in the New World, away from the Church of England, and that is what drove them there. And as well as they saw this as part of their ethnic identity as Englishmen. That is why they wanted to leave Holland, because they are not Dutch. The Pilgrims were not Dutch, and they were not Spanish either. And I saw today in Instagram, there were some Catholics, great Catholics, and they posted pictures of the colony in St. Augustine in Florida. And they said, oh, this was the first Thanksgiving. It was a celebration of the Eucharist several decades before the Pilgrims were to arrive. And that's somewhat true, but this wasn't the nation of America we're talking about here. America is not a Spanish colony. And for better or for worse, it is, in fact, it was the result of the fruits of the Puritans that established who we are today. And it was in the Declaration of Independence when basically the descendants of the Puritans said, we are no longer even English. We separate ourselves even from the Anglo-Saxons. We see ourselves as a separate identity, that is the American identity, that was forged when we became like this dissident group, that was forged when we wanted to come to the New World in order to convert the natives. And that is what today we are trying to protect as conservatives. That is why we want to preserve a Christian nation and a European nation, particularly one that is Anglo in nature, or one that, preserves its native identity. And so some people say, does that mean we have to remain a Protestant nation? And that's not necessarily what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the themes that the Protestants have created, ultimately, I think they did come from something of a Catholic sort. I think everything that is good and true comes from the Logos, of course. It comes from the natural law. And of course, the most sincere, the most fullest expression that is in the Catholic Church. And so I think that the Catholic Church has to adapt some of its disciplinary teachings for the Protestant environment. And that isn't to adapt dogma. Disciplinary teaching means the way we do fasting. And my example of this is that tomorrow is Friday. Friday for Catholics is the day that you are supposed to fast from meat, traditionally. After the Second Vatican Council, and I think it's the Code of Canon Law in the 1980s, they changed that a little bit. So now on every Friday you have to have some penance. But before that, on every Friday you had to fast from meat. Abstain from meat, rather. Fasting is a little different. There is a canonical difference between fasting and abstaining, so I want to be very careful my verbiage there. So yes, you have to abstain from meat on Fridays. I think most Catholics, sincere Catholics today, still do that. But on the day after Thanksgiving, the Pope issued a special dispensation to Americans, saying that they did not have to abide by that. They could do some other penance, because they did not want the food that we are eating today, the meat, the turkey, to go to waste. Of course, when you look at, I think it was Pius the 12th, I want to say, it was one of those, it was one of the 12th or 10th or 9th, one of those Piuses, I think. Maybe someone will correct me. But they gave a special dispensation to fit, the time and the culture of America. Of course, the United States Council of Catholic Bishops has their own disciplinary teachings. And that's kind of what I mean by the Catholic Church is adopting some of the disciplinary, established attitudes of the region. And so I think we can recognize the spiritual foundations of America as being this Protestant phenomena, while still saying that the parts of it that are good and that we want to preserve ultimately still have their stem from the Logos, stem from Christ, which is the ultimate incarnation in the Catholic Church. Hopefully that made some sense. So, of course, I'm not trying to say we don't convert Protestants. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying, though, is that the Puritan foundation was very vital and imperative to this nation. And we're not a Spanish colony. We're an American colony. We're not a Native American colony either. I've seen this. This is probably the worst take I've seen all day. Well, the worst one is the ones that say like the Pilgrims were genocidal. That is just flat out wrong. The Pilgrims had a peace treaty with the Native Americans. Of course, that is what we celebrate on Thanksgiving as part of that peace treaty, where they agreed with wherever the local Indian tribe was, with Squanto, and forget the name, but they said that if there was any Indian tribe that attacked the Pilgrims, they would support each other, or if some other warring tribe attacked the other local indigenous people, the Pilgrims would help them out. And so there were some, of course, rough spots, but for the most part, they had good relations. The Pilgrims did. So I don't know why people bring that up. It's just ludicrous. But another crazy one I've seen is that they are illegal immigrants, that the Pilgrims are here as immigrants. And that is asinine, because there was no nation here. The Native Americans were these warring, savage people, okay? I agree with Nick Fuentes when he said there's no noble savages when we're talking about, these native peoples that are warring, that are, I think, for the most part, pretty godless, and maybe there were some exceptions, but for the most part, I really don't, I don't see that like a formal nation here. I see a bunch of nomads that had no concept of private property or statehood. And so they were settlers. The Pilgrims were here to settle, to conquer, and to tame the West, to tame America. And that is what we enjoy today, is the abundance and fruits of their labor. And the fact that some people want to just say, oh, they were illegal immigrants, or that this was stolen land, and therefore to justify the replacement or the destruction of our nation is to spit in the face of my ancestors and the people that established the country that we now enjoy today. And we take it for granted, I think, what they went through. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around what it would be like to lose half, my people, the people I went on this long voyage with across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. This was the out before phones, cars, radios. So you can't contact anyone in this new world where the only people that speak your language are the people that are in your proximity. And outside it is just this endless forest of New England. And beyond that, they have no idea what else lies ahead. They have no idea what could exist out there. And yet they persevered. And yet today, for some reason, we have this absurd notion that we should negate and abandon everything that they stood for and that they wanted to acquire for us. And it just bothers me to no end, honestly, that because these are my ancestors I'm talking about. So it is personal. It is personal to me that they want to deface and defame our legacy, our heritage in this way. And I'm not going to stand up for it. And I will always remember the traditional spirit of America, its traditional identity, the fact that it had this English roots, this dissident and Puritan roots. And Puritan means something, by the way. Puritans, of course, like I said, were Calvinists. And so paradoxically, they believed that the only way to show that you were a Christian was if you had like good works. It meant you were predestined. So they were very sincere. They were very much obsessed with living pure, holy lives. And that is what we saw in America. America has always been a nation, I think, that's cared about the welfare of the world. I think sometimes to its own detriment. It's cared a little too much about the compassion side. But they've always been, they decried war crimes and decried human trafficking. And for the most part, we had issues with slavery in the South, but America was able to, I think, settle it much like the other European nations in very much, I think, a better way than, some of these other nations in Africa, which were practicing slavery up until the UN told them to stop, and some of them still are. Anyway, sorry, I kind of rambled on there, went off a little bit. So yes, happy Thanksgiving, guys. Thank you so much for watching here. We are a great nation. Never forget that. The people who founded this nation were giants. We stand on the shoulders of spiritual giants, these titans who do settle, were able to tame the land, were able to come to this area that they didn't know how to plant crops. They didn't know how to fish and to do these things. They had to learn to get along with the natives, to learn these skills. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't something that they were able to get done, but they did. We have some people that are telling us, oh, we should bring in refugees from Africa. We should bring in refugees from parts of the world that they didn't even have a written language until Europeans were able to settle. Europeans were able to settle in like the grab for Africa in like the 1800s and 1700s, in that time space. They didn't have even a written language. They're still eating mud to this day. You're telling me that, yeah, we should bring these people in because they're equivalent to the people who were these trailblazers who were able to build, able to conquer, build, and settle this great nation that we have today. And I can't even articulate just how, I think, impressive our nation is. And even though technically, Protestantism is the most perennial of all the traditions, I still think it is up there with these quasi-perennial, quasi-traditional. And therefore we can say, Japan is founded on Shintoism, China maybe Confucianism, India, Hinduism. Those are kind of like the spiritual foundations. In America was this Puritan foundation. And that is what, that is where we derive, of course, our identity from. And our identity would not be the same if there were different environmental circumstances or mental conditions. And we cannot lose sight of that. We cannot lose sight of who we are as a people and the spirit of an American that exists in our blood. All right, so we are very insanely generous, very true right-wing Rice, absolutely correct. So I don't know what. Not too many, not too much comments. I'm actually kind of surprised. So yeah, I'm really hungry. So that was kind of all I wanted to say about Thanksgiving. Thank you for listening. It's a very important holiday, and people, I saw someone, I posted this on my Instagram. Someone was complaining that, I think it was Jesus Christ was trending on Twitter. I saw this in a meme. I don't know if this actually occurred. And they said, and they were complaining like, this isn't a religious holiday. How dare they shove their sky daddy, some cringe, neckbeard take down our throats. No. This is an American significant spiritual moment. And we talk about, and I mentioned, what drove them was their religion, was the fact that, they are dissident. They had their own individual way of worshiping God. And of course, they were, were also looking to retain their Anglo, I guess you could say, identity, Anglo traditions and culture and language. That was the other aspect they brought up tonight. So, all right, there you go. Did I celebrate with the family? Oh, you missed it, Orange. I said my family is out of town. That's awesome. It's great. It's a great holiday. It's an awesome holiday. You should celebrate with your family and your relatives, those you love. And my family's out of town. And you're like, oh yeah, we're going to out of town. I'm like, all right, that's great. But we kind of celebrated something similar on Tuesday night. We had some dinner together in Turkey. So we had our own thing, but my parents aren't probably as into the traditions as I am. Not as conscious of the fabric that defines the American experiment. This was what it is. It was this experiment. It was an experiment because not all, interestingly enough, the Puritans that were in, these separatists, I think it was like the Brownians in particular, this Brownian colony, not all of them left to go to the New World. Only like some of them did. The young ones did, the healthy ones. And it was kind of like this experiment to see, would it work? Would this take off? Could this be viable? And what do we know today? We went to the moon. We have the the most robust economy, and we have probably one of the greatest nations to ever walk this earth. The most compassionate nation, most, I think, egalitarian in many respects. And it's unfortunate the nature of people who want to just destroy it. And that is why people say that, we're so divided these days. Can't we just agree to disagree? Unfortunately, we can't anymore, it seems, because we've reached this inflection point where it's no longer like, okay, we all kind of have this, we all love this country, we all want to retain its identity. Maybe we disagree about economic policies. We might have this, we should have a Keynesian policy, or we should have like a trickle down policy or something like that. We can discuss these things civilly, but if one person wants to destroy our spiritual foundation, and they say that, oh, these things that are abominable, like abortion, are rights, and we say no, it's the opposite. It's the right of the fetus to be born, to have a chance at life, and so it's the opposite. And the fact that you want to do this is an affront to God. And so I think that we've reached this just collision point, and I don't see a way to go back. I really don't. I think the far left, you could say it's like this materialist versus the spiritualist in a certain sense. So yeah, that was sorry, I was kind of off topic, but yeah.